Thank you so much for joining me once again. This is Gurpal Singh from Gursur Education. As you all know that we have started the series regarding the video lectures of financial management. So in this video lecture, we shall particularly be talking about sources of finance. So I am going to explain in detail from where you can get money so that you can invest it into your business. So there are so many ways. We have short term sources of finance, we have long term sources of finance, we have medium term sources of finance. So many things are there to be covered. So usually what happens, this is the uh, very initial part of understanding regarding the financial management, because when you talk about financial management, obviously you are concerned about your financial planning. So first of all, if you have funds, only then you can invest into your business. So how to raise funds, I shall tell you in this video lecture. So there are so many ways. We shall be talking about ownership securities, which can further be bifurcated into equity and preferential capital. And we shall be talking about creditorship securities as well, which are basically categorized as debentures, creditors, or short-term finances as well. So I hope you would have got the idea. Okay, so in case this lecture gets large enough, like for 1 hour, then this shall be taken into parts and all the parts shall be joined. So I hope you would enjoy this video lecture. I'm just going to share the screen, see that and enjoy. All right, we have already given you information in the previous lecture that our next lecture is gonna be regarding the sources of finances. I have given you a very efficient example of you being an entrepreneur. Okay, and if you feel yourself as an entrepreneur, then obviously then you have to decide so many things regarding finances, and decisions regarding all these things are covered under the broader part of financial management. So now first, regarding the objectives of financial management, we have already taken the lecture, we have studied its scope, and I have taught you the basics regarding FM. Now as I told you that time, that we shall be talking about sources of a finance. So sources of finance, in this specific lecture I shall be telling you how can you get funds so that you could start your business, so that you can start your venture, so that each and every entrepreneur from from the point of view of a joint stock company, how you can get those funds. So this is going to be the topic of this specific lecture. So the funds could be divided into two parts. Okay, short term and long term funds. So this is the complete description of sources of finance. Okay, so although these are repeated in terms, okay, each and everything is already will be provided to you along with this video lecture at when it's time come in the PDF format. All that structure is already written. Okay, so one by one we shall be talking about all these things. Okay, if we study only these, like long term, medium term, and short term finances, sources of finance, then that would be sufficient. Okay, because these are in a repetition only. Three categories have been made, like on the basis of time, on the basis of ownership, on the basis of sources of a generation. But this is the repetition, and I must tell you, the exam is not going to ask you a very core and specific question, that which of the following category fall under which of the broader head. These kind of questions are not going to fall. Then why we have placed this specific picture in your screen? The only reason being that it lets the video become very interactive for you, and it makes your interest in studying. Okay, so when we talk about long term funds or long term finances, sources of finance, this is equity share, preference share, internal accruals, then debentures, long term loan, venture capital, assets securitization, ADR, GDR loans, all these things are there. Okay, so medium term financing can be anything like preference share, debentures, medium term loan from different sources, lease financing, hire purchase finance, these kind of things. So why I am taking the names of these only, the only reason being in the upcoming slides we have contained the details regarding each and every source of finance. So that picture was just to show you, to give you an idea how you can remember the names of all. So whatever the details of these are going to be covered in the upcoming uh, slides. So now just one by one going to share with you the details of all the sources. The first sources of finance could be bifurcated into two parts. Okay, so these are short term and long term basically. So medium term you can avoid, because I have already told you they are not going to be very specific. You must, the knowledge you must have only is what is the source of finance and how you can get money from that specific source of finance. Like if there is equity, you must have the knowledge of equity. If this is debenture, you must have the knowledge of debenture. If this is creditor, you must have the knowledge of creditors. So this is all. So sources of finance include different avenues from which you can receive funds. For analyzing and comparing sources, it needs the understanding of all characteristics of financing sources, and following details contains all the necessary information regarding these. The first are long-term sources of finance. Okay, long-term sources of finance are the sources which provide you funds for more than 5 years. These can provide you funds for 10 years, 15, 20 years, or maybe more depending on the factors. So capital expenditure in fixed assets like plant, machinery, land, building, etc. of a business are funded only using the long-term sources of finance. Okay, so these are the first sources of finance, and these can be classified into following categories. One by one we shall be talking about these now. These are share capital or equity share. This is the very first source. Okay, and after that there is preference share capital. Preference share capital is there. We shall be watching their explanation in upcoming slide. After that there is a retained earning. After that there are debentures and bonds. Then term loans from financial institution. These are a developmental financial institution like SIDBI, NABARD, NABARD. We have gone through from these as well. Then venture funding, venture capitalists, they can help you. Then asset securitization, you can secure your asset and you can take loans. Then ADR, GDR, about which we have already studied. These can be the long-term sources of finance. Then when we talk about medium-term sources of finance, these are those sources which can fund you, which can finance you for the period from 3 to 5 years. Okay, these are considered to be the medium term sources of finance, and these are generally used for two reasons. The first reason can be when a long term capital is not available for the time being. Okay, this is not available, then you can use these funds. Then secondly, when a deferred revenue expenditure like advertisement are made, which are going to be covered for the period of 3 to 5 years, when you have to make an expenditure for which you are expecting the return over the years, like not in the first year but in the in a different time span like 3 to 5 years. So that kind of expenditures are funded by using the funds from medium term finances. So these can be in the following formats. Okay, so these can be like preference share capital, they can be debentures, they can be medium term loans from different institutions like financial institution, government institutions, commercial banks. After that there can be lease financing as well. You can take on a rental lease some of the machineries. Then hire purchase finances as well. You hire, and after the installations are covered you purchase the asset. So these are the medium term sources of finance from which you can raise funds. And after that there are the last term, these are short term sources of finance. Okay, these are for lesser than 1 year, the period of 1 year. These are needed only for short term assets. Okay, the need for short term finance arise to finance current assets like a business inventory of raw material, finished goods, debtors, minimum cash and bank balance, etc. Short-term financing is also named as working capital financing. Okay, so there are different avenues uh, can be as given below. Okay, so where can you get these short-term finances from? The first are trade credits. You can get a trade credits. Okay, you can get very short-term loan from banks like credit cards. You can get fixed deposits for one or less year. Okay, from different persons. After that, you can receive advances from your customer. Your creditors can give you money. Your payables, you can delay your payables. You can get the factoring services as well. You can take your bills, get your bills discounted as well. So these are very short term sources of finance about which you have to study. Okay, so now in the upcoming slides, major sources of finance, I think these have been covered in detail. So the very first thing are ownership securities or shares. Okay, so these can be these are actually the shares, okay, which have been prescribed in the Indian Companies Act, the amended Act 2013. So a share, what is a share? First of all, you must have the knowledge regarding share. So a share is a right. This is a right to participate in profits made by a company while it is a going concern. Okay, so if the company is running, then a share is a right to participate in profit. But if a company is wound up, then a share is a right in the asset. So you have the right in those assets in the company. Okay, so these are, that's why these are non-ownership securities, and it can be divided into two parts. Okay, so these can be equity, these can be equity shares, and these can be preference shares. Okay, so one by one we have to talk about these. Okay, so where these have been defined under the provision of a section 86 of Indian Companies Act. Here has been written 1956, but you can take the name of amended Company Act 2013. So first we shall talk about preference shares, and after that we shall be talking about equity shares, because preference share is the concept of a preference share is longer than equity share. So preference shares, as the name suggests, these are those shares which get preference for two major things. Preference for two major things. Okay, so preference shares are those shares which carry priority rights and regard to payment of a dividend and a return of a capital. So that all has been written in section 85 of Indian Companies Act. So I have already told you that they get two kinds of preferences. So what are these preferences? This is the first is preference with regard to payment of dividend and fixed at fixed rate. Like if you deposit money in an FD, you get some around 5%. Okay, but if you purchase the preference shares of a company, you get a fixed rate of dividend annually. That can be 8%, 9%, 7%, 10, or anything as per the company's policy. So this is the first thing for which you get the preference if you have invested your funds in one or another joint stock company. The second is preference as to repayment of capital in event of wind up. So if a company is liquidated or if the company is wound up, then what happens? Then before payment to the equity shareholders, your payment is ensured first. Okay, so if you are holding the preference share capital, what happens? Payment is made to you first in comparison with payment to be made to equity shareholder. So these are the two rights these preference shareholders are having. So I hope you have got the knowledge regarding these. Now the most important topic which we have to cover, there are certain kinds of preference shares which we have to understand. Okay, So first you have to get the idea of what are preference shares. I have already taught you the shares which have two kinds of preferences. I have already taught you what are these. And the second topic is going to be what are the different kinds of preference shares about which we are going to talk about right now. So when we talk about preference shares types, the first is cumulative and non-cumulative preference shares. Okay, so cumulative preference shares are sure to receive dividend on preference share held by them for all years out of earning of the company. Suppose in 2021, the company has earned money, so they had pledged that we shall provide 8% return to the preference shareholder. Then they pay them in 2022, 23, 24, 5, in any number of year they have to pay 8% return, irrespective they are earning or not earning, whether they are suffering losses, whether they are earning the money, they have to pay to the preference shares the dividend. So these kind of preference shares are known as cumulative. But in case of non-cumulative preference share, if the company has not earned in a specific year, if a company has not earned money, or they do not have sufficient net profit so that they can give the dividend, so in that case the company can just take back all the amount, and they are not in binding situation for giving the dividends to preference shares. So we can say in a non-cumulative preference shareholders are entitled of the yearly dividend only if there is sufficient net profit in that year. And if the net profit is not sufficient, then they don't get any kind of a dividend. The second is participating and non-participating preference shares. So the participating preference shares are those which further have two rights. First is obviously the fixed dividend, and secondly, if there are excessive profits, then they get some more surplus share in profits as well. So they are participating preference shares. In case of non-participating preference share, they get only fixed dividend and they do not get any kind of share in surplus profit. Even if the company is earning more and more, they are entitled to only fixed dividend. The next is a redeemable and irredeemable preference shares. So redeemable preference shares are those shares which the company has to redeem after a certain date. Redeem means repay. Like company has raised the fund for 4 years. Okay, for 4 years they have issued the preference shares. So after the 4 year, it has to repay the capital to the shareholders, preference shareholder. It has to repay, and that repayment is known as the redemption of preference share capital. And in case of irredeemable preference shares, these are not to be redeemed. The company is not in the binding situation or position to redeem those shares. The preference share which cannot be redeemed during the lifetime of the company are known as irredeemable preference shares. The next is convertible or non-convertible preference shares. So convertible are those which can be converted into equity shares after a specific time period, if the company norms are there. So if you have purchased the preference share capital of a company, and after, if the company is giving you the option to convert these to the equity shares, so that these kind of shares are known as convertible preference shares. So the non-convertible preference share are those which cannot be converted into equity capital ever, which cannot be converted. The company do not give any kind of these options. The next is guaranteed preference shares. Okay, so these are the specific kind of preference shares. In case of a conversion of a private concern into a limited company, or in case of amalgamation and absorption, the seller guarantees particular rate of dividend on preference shares. So these are known as guaranteed preference share capital. So when a private company is liquidated, or this is absorbed uh, by another company, okay, so there are some preference shares which gets the pledge by the newly made company that they shall be getting certain percentage of as a dividend for certain years. Okay, so these are known as guaranteed preference shares. The next, now this is the term of equity share. Okay, these are the original owners of the company. Okay, these are original owner after making payment to each and every party from the net profits. Okay, so you have earned the net profit, and after that one more account is prepared. This is known as profit and loss appropriation account, and in that account all the appropriations are being made, like to whatever the parties you have to make the payment, all the payments are made in the profit and loss appropriation account. First of all, the payment is made to secured debentures, and after that debenture holder, then preference share capital, and whatever is left after that, this is known as, again, this is known as net profit, which is left for the equity shareholders. So whatever the residuals are left after making payment to all the parties, these residuals go for equity shareholder, and they are known as the real owner of the company. So section 85 subsection 2 define the equity shares. So equity shares are those which are not preference shares, which do not get any kind of preference, but whatever is left after making payment to all the parties, that ultimately goes to equity shareholders. A substantial part of risk capital of a company is raised from this source, which is not of permanent nature. Okay, so if today or any day you invest in any company by taking their shares, okay, through your demat account, then obviously you are shareholder of the company, and those shares are equity shares. So equity shares are the real owner of the company. Then there are deferred share of it of okay, so this is one term I think about which you must have the knowledge right now. So these are shares which are issued actually to founder or promoters of the company who has brought the idea of making this company, the people, the persons who have brought the idea. The promoter takes these shares for enabling them to control the company. Okay, so these shares have extraordinary rights, though the face value is very low. Okay, so these kind of shares, like they take the higher decision making authority with them. So these are the things which which you have to study. Okay, so the holder of deferred shares can get dividend only after preference shares and equity shareholders shall have received their dividend. So these are the last payment authorities. Okay, so because these are those person which were actually behind the idea of making the company. So even after payment to the equity shareholder, whatever, if something is left, that goes to the, and that is very meager amount, but they do not take that, because they already have a great kind of stake or equity shares with them. Because whatever, whoever is the director or promoter of the company, obviously he shall be holding higher shares or higher stake in that company. Then now we have to study regarding creditorship securities. Ownership securities I have taught you. Okay, these were of two kinds basically. Preference share I taught you, equity share I have taught you. Now there are creditorship securities. These are also known as debentures. Okay, debentures. So what are debentures? These are same like FD. This is a certificate provided by the company that you have given or invested certain amount with that company for a certain period of time. Okay, so when you have invested, suppose 1 lakh into a company for a specific percentage of interest, so that investment is known as investment is in debenture. And why people make it? Because they ensures higher return than investment in in fixed deposit or any other deposit. So a company can raise funds by issuing debentures. The word debenture is derived from Latin word libre, that means to own. Okay, so this is an instrument in writing. So in writing, this is issued by a company and it's under seal of company, and this acknowledge a debt for a certain sum of money, giving an undertaking to repay that sum on or after a fixed future date. So you just take a certificate from the company that you have invested that money, and after a certain period of time that money shall be reback to you with the payment of interest. So that is known as a debenture. Okay, this is actually a certificate. Then after that there are some more we can say sources of finances, the first of which is internal financing. Okay, internal financing. So what's there? This system is known as a pluffing back of a profits. Once this question was asked in the examination. So what do we mean by that? When company has earned higher profits in a specific year, like you have earned net profits, then instead of going dividend, you reserve that money. You reserve that money and you create a separate account known as reserves and surpluses. And for the next investment opportunity, you do not raise funds by issuing your capital. You use the money which is already lying in the reserve and surpluses account. So that money is known as pluffing back of profits. So in the theory of a capital structure, internal financing is the name for a firm using its profit as a source of capital for new investment. Okay, so in that case, you are not relying on the external sources of funds, but you use your own money which you have saved. The next is loan financing. Okay, you can get the loan financing as well. These are of two kinds. The first is secured and the second one is unsecured loans. So for secured, you have to give some kind of a security, obviously. Security involves in the form of a collateral as an assurance for that the loans shall be repaid. If a debtor default on the loan, the collateral is forfeited. So this is a system of loan financing. You can take, you can go with the banks or some capitalists so that you can raise the funds from this source. Then there are specialized financial institutions. I have already taught you about that. Like Exim Bank, we have studied, like BIFR, Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction. Then SIDBI, we have gone through, Small Industrial Development Bank of India. National Housing Bank, we have studied. Okay, so these are the undertakings from which you can raise funds, from which you can get the money in case you have a very good business idea. The details of these have already been written in here. I don't think that much of the need is there, but we shall be recalling all our concepts. First is Exim Bank or Export Import Bank of India. The Export Import Bank of India ranks high among specialized financial institutions in India. That was set up in 1981 to enhance international trade, and it offers financial assistance to exporter and importers. So that ultimately becomes the links between the financial institutions and the companies, so that the companies are never short of funds. So Exim Bank helped the companies in this way. Then there is SIDBI, okay, Small Industrial Development Bank of India, also rank higher among specialized financial institution, was founded in 1990, and it develops the small scale industry with the advisory services. It helps in advisory kind of services to all the companies, small scale. Then NHB, this is National Housing Bank, that was established in 1988 as per the guidelines of National Housing Bank 1987. With a view to accelerate the growth of housing finance institution by providing them with financial and other required assistance. And whenever the financial assistance is needed to the companies for housing finances, then National Housing Bank is there. Then BIFR, this is Board for Industrial and Financial Reconstruction, that was set up in 1987, and it was set up in order to advise all aspects need to set up for sick industrial units. So it was a set up for the purpose of revival of sick industrial unit and to give them financial assistance. This is also one of the way to get yourself announced. Then there are some sources of innovating funding. Okay, innovating funding. There are some institutions who are very keen for new kind of businesses. So funding sources available to business may include like applying directly for the applying for government or university funding and considering an initial IPOs. So these kind of funding options are available to you. It is imperative that startup businesses plan for growth in order to be able to meet the commercial objective. If your idea is very strong, you can get funds from anywhere. Okay, if you can satisfy the government or some venture capitalist, about which we have to study. So these sources or these innovative funding sources can be government grants. First, it can be government grants. Government can give you grant like this, give the grant to exporters of the country so that they can export goods and services. After that, there are some business angels. So they are high net worth individuals who invest directly into entrepreneurial business. So if you know any business angel, you can go to them. It is usually smart money, where in addition to capital, expert is also given by them. So this is known as angel financing. Okay, they are not being a charity or pursuing a hobby, but they are investing in the business in which they feel they this is worth investing. Then there is venture capital. Some people have so much funds, so many funds. Okay, so if they have funds, then they try to find the people who are having the good idea so that it could be invested, their money could be invested and they can get higher returns. And these ideas are usually very risky. Okay, so venture capitalists are fund managers who invest other people's money into private businesses in a return for equity in a business. So venture capital is most commonly sought to finance high risky projects such as commercialization of early stage industrial establishment. So this is those as well. Okay, so there is a venture capitalist, you just go to them, you just show your idea. If your idea is good, but that is very risky, and they people agree to you, they give you money, and in a return they expect high stake in your company. So these are venture capital giver. And the starter is usually known as the business director or promoter. Then I think that's going to be the last one. Okay, so that this is crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a practice of funding a major project or venture by raising money from large number of people. You try to go to large audience. It enables entrepreneur to gain market validation and avoid giving up equity before going all out and taking product concept to market. So when you know so many people, instead of issuing your equity share, you can go there. Okay, you can go to your friends, your relatives, your neighbors, your anyone who has trust in you, you can go to them. These kind of systems can be there. And nowadays there are famous crowdfunding websites which are in developed nations only. Okay, so in which you just give them your idea and so many people are ready to give you money. Okay, so for a stake in your company, so if this is the case, you can get money from them as well. So I think in this specific lecture, that was much more than needed. You have got the knowledge of all the things regarding how you can get money to start your business. So in when we talk about the financial management, after studying its objective, the second thing you have to learn how you can get money, uh, how you can get money And about all that thing, I think I have already taught you. That was much more than needed.